With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Tactics. We are always appreciative that you're able to join us whenever you can, right here, whether you're watching on Facebook Live, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Twitch, on Periscope, however you're watching the show. We certainly appreciate you being with us here each and every weekday, where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. So, I know that we usually spend Wednesday on things of a more spiritual nature, and we're going to kind of continue that pattern, but of course there is big breaking news. And that news is that Trump has declassified and disseminated the transcript that was in question of the call that he had between him and the president of Ukraine. And one thing that I'm going to point out here, because I do think there is a spiritual message actually in the way that we as a country have handled it, not so much in the call itself. Hate does destroy you. Now, it hurts other people for sure. The reason that hatred is sort of universally reviled by all of the world's major religions, even if some of them sort of in an underhanded way give authenticity to hate depending on who you're hating. The reason that it is seen as something that is poisonous by all of the world's major religions is because it tends to breed other hate, and it destroys the person that is doing the hate in the process. When you hate somebody so completely, it causes you to make bad decisions that wind up hurting you more than it hurts them. And this is certainly true, and we can see it playing out in real time with much of the left with President Trump, and that will become more clear when we've actually read the content of this call. Now, I have the transcript of it right here. You can see it's not long, only 5 pages. This is the transcript that was released. There is one disclaimer, and I want to make clear that it seems as though, because this whole thing was looked over by the intelligence community to make sure there was no information that needed to stay out of the public's eye. So they did their best to ensure that this was taking place, and because of this, and because they had a desire to be as open and honest and forthcoming as possible, there is a memorandum attached to the bottom of this, just sort of a disclaimer to let you know that the content of this is reliable, but not necessarily verbatim. And so this is an important distinction. So this is the disclaimer here. A memorandum of the telephone conversation is not a verbatim transcript of the discussion. The text in this document records, notes, and recollects of the Situation Room duty officers and the NSC police staff assigned to listen and memorialize the conversation in written form as the conversation takes place. A number of factors can affect the accuracy of the record, including poor telecommunications connections and the variations in accent and or interpretation. The word inaudible is used to indicate portions of the conversation that the note taker was unable to hear. So what that means is, because there are going to be some people that try to jump on that and say, see, this is an edited memo. No, it's not. What this is saying is, this is a raw transcript, which means it may contain errors. They didn't go back through and listen to the recording again to make sure they didn't miss anything. But this is the memo of the telephone conversation that they recorded, not for public consumption, for internal consumption. In other words, this was the official record that the Trump administration kept for its own purposes before they ever decided to release it to the public. So if you're hearing anybody, any of the talking heads on any of the major news networks saying, see, it's not a verbatim transcript, No, it's not a verbatim transcript, but that doesn't mean that the information in it is inaccurate. Any mistakes in here are just that, mistakes, typos. They didn't do any editing. They weren't trying to wire work it into some way that makes Donald Trump look better. This is the official memo that came directly from that department with no intention of releasing it to the public. They're giving you the raw data here. Now, will we see the actual tape of the conversation come out in coming days? I don't know, maybe. But I have a feeling that if we do, it's going to say pretty much the same thing as here. There might be some prepositions that have changed. There might be a word that sounds similar to another word that got changed because there was a typo in the duty officer that was taking the notes here. That could happen. But the overall content, the overall theme of the letter is reliable based on that very disclaimer. So let's actually dive in to what's going on here. And by the way, I posted this on my Facebook page. I thoroughly encourage everybody within the sound of my voice, before you even hear my opinions on this, you need to read the letter yourself. Because I guarantee you that if you're having your discussions with your friends and neighbors, and remember that is the purpose of this show, Tactics, is to teach you how to have intelligent, meaningful, productive conversations with your friends and neighbors about politics. If you're having a discussion with them, you need to have read the letter yourself. It doesn't take but about 10 minutes. It's 5 pages long. It's not that big a deal. And even though it's, I don't know, a little dull, it's really not that bad a read. I put this together literally while I was cooking pasta, and the pasta was done about the time that I finished reading it. So, little inside look into my personal life and the way that I prepare for this show. But anyway, so they start off with a whole bunch of pleasantries. Trump congratulates him on his win in the parliament. The president of Ukraine, who, by the way, one thing that is a little embarrassing about this call is it reveals that this guy is a giant butt kisser. And I don't think that that's something that's exclusive to either the president of Ukraine or Trump. He is talking to the president of the most powerful country in the world. You can assume that there's going to be some butt kissing. And maybe my favorite quote in this is you're not only 100% right, you're 1,000% right. So there's a fair amount of, I don't even want to say groveling, and you have to also keep in mind that there's probably some things that are kind of loose in the translation, so I don't want to overplay that, but it is a little bit amusing to see how much of a butt kisser the president of the Ukraine is. But anyway, so let's actually get into the content of this. After they exchange pleasantries, talk about the elections and some current events, this is the relevant part of the conversation that Democrats are saying that President Trump should be impeached for. And they were saying this before they got this transcript, by the way. They were saying it basically off of a water cooler rumor that was spreading around the office with someone who did not have firsthand information of the call. He didn't hear the call himself. He heard someone else talking about the call. So you can see how there's already a pretty wide room given there for mistakes in the transmission to be made. But nonetheless, this is the actual transcript of the call. And remember that their big thing was, what President Trump was doing was threatening to withhold military aid or financial assistance from the Ukraine if they didn't look into Hunter Biden's shady business dealings with Burisma and the natural gas company over there that is run by the Ukrainian government. So this is the actual content of the call. The president: well, it's very nice of you to say that. I will say that we do a lot for Ukraine. We spend a lot of our effort and a lot of time, much more than the European countries are doing, and should be helping you more than they are. Germany does almost nothing for you. All they do is talk, and I think it's something that you should really ask them about. When I was speaking to Angela Merkel, she talks Ukraine, but doesn't do anything. A lot of the European countries are the same way, so I think it's something you want to look at, but the United States has been very good to Ukraine. I wouldn't say that it's reciprocal necessarily, because things are happening that are not good, but the United States has been very good to Ukraine. So a couple things to point out. First of all, anybody that is familiar with the way that Donald Trump talks understands that this is not something that is out of line. I mean, I think it's safe to say, I could be going out on a limb here, but I think it's safe to say that the president is a self-promoter and very much a promoter of the country. He thinks it's the biggest, it's the best, it's the greatest country there's ever been. That's Donald Trump. I mean, people accuse him of being a nationalist because of how highly he praises the country constantly. It's who the man is. And he does the same thing with himself. He's constantly praising himself, talking about all the great things that he's done. This is no different. He's doing this because this is his personality, and he also is trying to convey to the president of Ukraine that the United States does a lot for Ukraine. Which, we have done some good things for Ukraine. We do sell them weapons, which is, for one, incredibly essential right now, because lest we forget that Ukraine is at war with Russia. You don't hear a lot about it in the mainstream media, but there are casualties daily. Keep in mind, I'm going to Ukraine in less than a month. I've already been there before. This is something that is on the forefront of their mind constantly. And it is not outside of the president's character to discuss how much we've done for Ukraine, because that's how he talks with everybody. When he talks to people, he tells them how much he's done for them, how much he's done for the country, how much the country has done for this person or this country or that country. None of this is out of the ordinary for President Trump. All right, now this is President Zelenski. This is sort of his response to that. Yes, you are absolutely right. Not only 100%, but actually 1,000%. And I can tell you the following. I did talk to Angela Merkel, and I did meet with her. By the way, I think it's hysterical that what we're seeing here is the president of Ukraine and the president of the United States bashing Angela Merkel. I mean, this kind of junk goes on. You know it. You know that when they're talking to each other, they talk about the other world leaders. I mean, this just confirms what people have known for a really long time. They're just kind of trash talking Merkel, which, I mean, frankly, I don't feel bad for her on. Merkel's been garbage for the nation of Germany. But anyway, so here's the president bashing Angela Merkel and then the president of Ukraine basically agreeing with him. I also met with and talked to Macron, president of France, and I told them, or is he prime minister? I think he's president. Macron, and I told them that they are not doing quite as much as they need to be doing on the issues with the sanctions. They are not enforcing the sanctions. They are not working as much as they should work for Ukraine. Now, to give a little context here, now, of course, President Trump knows what he's talking about. At least I assumed that he does. What's happening here is that they're talking about the sanctions on Russia, which, as I said, they're in constant combat with on a daily basis right now. Russia has annexed Crimea. They're trying to move further into the Ukraine. They're trying to take Ukraine over. And the only thing that has kept them from being more bold, and frankly, I hate to say this, but taking over Ukraine in probably a pretty short amount of time, the only thing that has stopped Russia from doing that is the U.S. intervening. Now, personally, I thought that we should have intervened a long time ago when Barack Obama basically let them do whatever they wanted to. I do think it's hilarious that what we're talking about here is you have, right now, target number one for the Russians, the president of the Ukraine saying, yes, America is the only one that's actually being tough on Russia, to the president that the left constantly says is too soft on Russia. Look, this guy has absolutely no motivation to say anything differently. I mean, yes, he's kind of a butt kisser, but he has no motivation to lie here. He's not in front of the cameras. He's not in front of the press. And he's saying, yeah, the U.S. has done more for us on this, and he specifically points out how the U.S. is doing more for his country on this to combat Russia. Because we're the ones selling them weapons, and we're the ones that are actually enforcing the sanctions that have been put on Russia, and none of the other countries seem to be willing to do that. So, here's the president of Ukraine continuing on. It turns out that even though logically the European Union should be our biggest partner, but technically the United States is a much bigger partner than the European Union, and I'm very grateful to you for that because the United States is doing quite a lot for Ukraine. much more than the European Union, especially when we are talking about sanctions against the Russian Federation. I would also like to thank you for your great support in the area of defense. We are ready to continue to cooperate for the next steps of specifically, we are almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States for defense purposes. So again, talking about what I just discussed with you. This is President Trump's response, and this is where he makes the request that is the source of all the contention and the way that this rumor got started. I want you to listen very carefully. I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot, and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess that you have one of your wealthy people. The server, they say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on, the whole situation. I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people. I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it. As you saw yesterday, that whole nonsense ended with a very poor performance by a man named Robert Mueller, an incompetent performance, but they say a lot of it started with Ukraine. Whatever you can do, it's important that you do it if it's possible. So a couple very important things of note here. First of all, and this is the big one, did you see anything in there that was a quid pro quo? Anything in there where Trump even hinted at, we're not going to be helping you out if you don't do this for us? Is there anything in there that suggests that Trump is saying we're going to pull back our support or we're not going to help you out financially? Anything like that suggested anywhere in this transcript? Because if so, I didn't see it. We see President Trump saying, we've done a lot for Ukraine. We have the Ukrainian president basically confirmed that. And then, almost in switching topics, the way that he starts this out, I would like you to do us a favor, though. He starts off in a completely different matter. Now, is it a good look for the president to be requesting other foreign leaders help him out with an investigation on somebody that could potentially be the person he's running against in the next election? Not necessarily. But he's not abusing the power of his office. He's not using his authority as president to say, if you don't do this, then I'm going to do X, or if you do this, then I'm going to help you out in this way. None of that is going on. There is no quid pro quo. And another thing that I find really fascinating about this is that, and we shouldn't be surprised about this with President Trump, really, he doesn't seem to know an awful lot about this. It almost seems as if somebody on his staff, in his administration, and this isn't necessarily nefarious, it's just the way that things are, it seems as though somebody else is requesting that President Trump ask him about this. And the reason that I say that is Trump doesn't seem to know an awful lot about it. Look at the wording that he's using here. He says, they say it's CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of the wealthy people. The server, they say Ukraine has it. He's speaking in broken sentences like he doesn't really understand what this story is centered around. And then he goes off into a tangent where he's bashing Robert Mueller, which, again, should surprise nobody. That's just who the president is. And he starts talking about the thing with Robert Mueller. They say a lot of it started with Ukraine. In other words, he is repeating what he has heard from other people. And in this case, I don't think it's Fox News. I think that this is probably more likely people surrounding the president, people on his staff. They're telling him this. What is he talking about there? Remember that a lot of the investigation centered around Paul Manafort. And the Russian investigation was at least partially based upon a meeting with Donald Trump Jr. with the Russians, who was orchestrated by who? Paul Manafort. Why was Paul Manafort brought into the investigation? Because of a dark money ledger that had his name listed twice, that he was working unregistered as a foreign agent for the Russian government inside Ukraine. He was working as a political consultant because that's what he does. He's a political consultant. The problem is there are laws against doing so for foreign nations unless you are registered with the State Department. He failed to do that and was getting dark money from the Russian government, and that's what put him under the microscope. And it was a large part of the justification for undergoing a massive $35 million 2-year investigation into our current president, because Paul Manafort was the campaign advisor for him at the time. So it's not outside of the realm of reasonability for Trump to say, you know, a lot of that mess, I heard that there was something that went on in Ukraine that kind of jump-started that. Is there any chance that you could look into it? Now, how does this all connect back to Joe Biden? Well, we found out from whistleblowers inside the Ukrainian government that the reason the word of that ledger leaked out is because the Democrats in America wanted it to happen. And those same whistleblowers were actually denied entry into the United States. Their visas were pulled, and the State Department, which was under Barack Obama at the time, would not let them in, would not let them cross, and they didn't want to transcribe it for fear of retaliation from their own government, who was in on the whole deal. Remember that in this whole process, 1.8 billion American taxpayer dollars went missing in the same bank that is owned by the natural gas company that was paying Hunter Biden nearly $1 billion, even though he had zero experience in natural gas. And somehow that money all went missing into offshore accounts. You better believe that if that had happened to Dick Cheney, for example, that the Democrats would be knocking the doors down to figure out where that money went. And now they don't even like the current president of the United States even asking this guy, hey, maybe you look into this? Maybe you see where this goes? And remember that it was Joe Biden that was withholding financial aid. Withholding financial aid that was going to Ukraine unless they fired the prosecutor that was looking into the details on this, which, by the way, Trump mentions a little bit later on, but still doesn't really seem to know what is happening here. He says, because he talks about it so vaguely, like he doesn't really understand all the details. Granted, it's a complicated story, but you would hope that the president was a little more on the ball with this. But a little bit further down in the same transcript, President Trump, after being assured that by President Zelenski that they'll look into it, he says, good, because I heard you had a prosecutor who was a very good and he was shut down, and that's really unfair. A lot of people are talking about that. The way that they shut your very good prosecutor down and had some bad people involved. Mr. Giuliani is a highly respected man. He was the mayor of New York, a great mayor. I would like him to come call you. I would like to have him call you with the Attorney General. And so what he goes on to say, he talks about that, and he actually does mention by name Biden's son a little bit later down. He says the other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people wanted to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General, that would be great. Biden went along bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. There's nothing in there that suggests that Trump was in any way threatening or promising anything to the president. Nothing that suggests that that's what was going on. Once again, as I predicted yesterday before I had this transcript, the Democrats see the football, they're charging towards it, they're kicking, Lucy pulls the football out from in front of them, and they wind up flat on their back looking like idiots yet again. The truth is, it's not because I'm a soothsayer, I'm not all that intelligent, it's just they've done it, about a dozen times now with this president, and it always ends the same way. They're always making much ado about nothing. And the hilarity about this is that if they do want to implicate Trump, if they do want to go after Trump on this, they're not going to be able to do that unless they also wind up hitting Biden in the process. And so it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out, because based on the details and the amount of evidence that we have, if it hurts anybody, it's going to hurt Biden, not Trump. Maybe it winds up hurting Trump a little in the polls because of the stigma, but frankly, I don't see that happening. They've got nothing on the guy. And he just put out the transcript to prove that. This is the problem with hate. It drives you so crazy, it blinds you to your reason and rationality to where you can't see things clearly. You're willing to do anything to hurt the person that is the subject, the focus of your hate. And even if you wind up succeeding, you destroy yourself in the process. That would be my warning to our friends on the left. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.